Regardless of if you think Die Hard is a Christmas movie or not, there's no arguing that it was a good movie, with some even considering it the greatest action movie ever made. Now, as with many good movies, they often either get a sequel or a video game. In the case of Die Hard, it got both. But it didn't stop at one video game, it actually turned into an entire franchise with no less than 7 mainline games and several mobile games. Now, 6 of these 7 were multi-platform, giving gamers many different ways to play them. However, one of these games was exclusive to Windows PCs, and to this day has never been re-released outside of that platform. That game is Die Hard Nakatomi Plaza, released in 2002 by Piranha Games. Now, in my experience, releasing a video game adaptation of a film more than 14 years old can be hit and miss. And in the case of Die Hard Nakatomi Plaza, the overall reception was mixed, with it currently sitting at a Metacritic rating of 54, with Eurogamer questioning if it were a cinematic action game or a cheap cash-in. Now, the version we are playing today is the original boxed release, or more specifically, my bestseller series copy, which released a year later in 2003. I am playing the game as it was originally intended, without any improvements. However, there is a community-built version called Die Hard Improved Edition, which offers several improvements to the game. However, for my retrospectives, I generally only use enhancements which improve the presentation and not the actual gameplay, at least not dramatically. In the case of the Improved Edition, it dramatically changes the gameplay, so I chose not to use it for my playthrough. However, I will drop a link in the comments if you want to check it out. Now, after just saying that I try and improve presentation, you're probably wondering why this video is not presented in native widescreen, and the reason for this comes down to the compatibility. There is a published widescreen fix for the game, which is achieved through editing some of the game's config files. However, in my personal experience, this caused instability and some unusual mouse issues, so I needed to revert to the game's original presentation. Now, ordinarily, I try and avoid any major story spoilers in my videos, so not to ruin the story for newcomers wanting to experience the game. But given the almost cult classic nature of Die Hard, I'm going to ignore that approach for this video. And by all means, if you haven't seen the movie, go and watch it on your favorite streaming service and then come back. I promise you won't regret it. With that said, Nakatomi Plaza follows the same basic plot outline of the movie it's based on. The invincible rat, the firefighting segment, and the time John McClane swims the equivalent of the English Channel. It's all here. But where the game deviates from the film plot is in adding a lot more scenarios that John gets drawn into while chasing down the main objective of eliminating the terrorist leader and saving his wife, with everything from leading a SWAT team to having to rescue multiple hostages spread throughout the building. All of the key scenes from the movie are also recreated, which really serves to ground the player in the fact that they are still experiencing the original Die Hard story. Honestly, I went into this game ready to be critical of the story, and my experience was the complete opposite. It turns out that Nakatomi Plaza provides an excellent sandbox for a first-person shooter, and as far as the game goes in expanding the film's plot, I think it does a really good job. Before we continue, a massive thank you to those who support the channel. If you enjoy this type of content, please consider liking the video or subscribing to the channel. With that out of the way, let's grab our Zippo lighter, pack our Motorola radio, and return to 2002 to remember Die Hard Nakatomi Plaza. The early 2000s were an interesting time for first-person shooters. The tried and tested formula of run, gun, and use keycards that had carried the genre through the 90s was starting to show its age, and gamers were demanding more innovation and immersion. Red Faction tackled this with environmental immersion, allowing you to destroy and effectively modify parts of the level. Soldier of Fortune introduced more complicated objectives and improved character fidelity. And Daikatana, well, tried to do all of this and more. The point is that first-person shooters couldn't regress by 2002, they had to offer something new. This equates to Nakatomi Plaza's biggest strength, but also its biggest weakness: variety. Now, I have to applaud the sheer amount of gameplay mechanics within Nakatomi Plaza. Environmental destruction, bomb defusal, escorting, fighting fires, squad combat, Honestly, there are too many things to list here for the scope of this video, but hopefully you get the idea that there are a lot of mechanics in this game. The challenge is, other systems within the game often conspire to impact the overall fun factor and at times cause it to descend into pure frustration. The most common denominator which caused frustration was one of the things I go on and on about as being the most important thing in a first-person shooter: camera and control. When I first started playing the game, I assumed I was experiencing some type of bug with the mouse control, as everything felt very jittery. So I ran some tests and spent a lot of time in the menu trying to improve it. And while I will say that I feel like where I landed was an improvement, it was still very far from ideal. And the reason this is compounded infinitely more than it should be is because virtually all the weapons in Nakatomi Plaza have a ridiculous amount of recoil combined with a very frustrating screen shake, requiring you to move the mouse to fight the vertical recoil. What this translated to was essentially having to target everyone's crotch just to help deal with the control and camera as the weapon delivered recoil. Oh, and the few weapons that do have limited recoil, such as the M60, has a muzzle flash so large and bright that you are practically disoriented every time you fire it, requiring you to compensate your movement just to stay on target. Oh, and on the topic of camera, the camera has this type of horizontal and vertical sway as the character moves, and yeah, I get that this is probably more realistic, but when you take the control issues and then include a camera that bops around like it's doing the Macarena, it doesn't translate to a good experience. As for the actual gameplay mechanics themselves, again, it's mixed. The environmental destruction and the bomb defusal segments are done quite well, whereas the escorting is at best passable and at worst simply broken. There's a segment in the game where you meet an NPC who you need to escort through an enemy area to a locked door for them to unlock it. Now, this is a fairly challenging segment in the game, so after dying a few times, I decided to clear out all of the enemies first and then go back to where I first met the NPC to escort him to the door, only for him to do nothing. I spent a lot of time trying to work out how to get this NPC to open the door, only to realize that as I had not moved through the enemy area with him, I had somehow glitched the game and he would never open the door, so I had to restart from an earlier save and bring him with me prior to eliminating all of the enemies. This time, when I reached the door, he opened it. I don't think I need to labour the point here, but this isn't a good experience for the player, especially when you compound the camera and control challenges in dealing with the difficult enemies. Then there's the firefighting section, and honestly, I'm feeling frustrated just remembering this. So there's a level where you meet an NPC who you need to keep alive and escort through a rapidly spreading fire. If we forget the camera and control for a moment, we're left with some incredibly questionable AI pathing by the NPC and a fire extinguisher which has a ridiculously low amount of charge and no way to indicate the level of charge. At first I thought it might be this icon, but it's not. In fact, I'm not even sure what this icon represents. This level also makes use of a far overused trope in the game: selected doors only opening when certain conditions are met, which when you are dealing with a rapidly spreading fire is far from ideal. And this brings me to my next point about the game, the overall level design. First, let me tell you to get used to hearing two very specific words a lot in this game. It's locked. Now, I don't inherently have a problem with linear games, but I expect linear games to abide by the rules of being linear. And by my definition, Nakatomi Plaza doesn't do that. One of the items the player is equipped with from the beginning is a police badge. Let me read from the manual how the game describes this. McLean's shield may come in handy when you come across civilians, hostages, SWAT team members, and police officers in the game. Use it to let them know you're a cop so they will follow you or do as you say. Here's a quick recap of what happened the first time I encountered a SWAT team member and used this badge. What the manual should have explained is that only in particular scripted moments can the player use this badge to avoid being shot by the SWAT team. There's a common theme to all of these issues: trial and error, and this isn't the type of experience I often look for when playing this type of game. However, believe it or not, all of these issues pale in comparison to my single largest issue in the game: the pacing. Generally speaking, most good FPSs start off easy and gradually ramp up the difficulty while making the player feel more powerful. Doom or Duke Nukem 3D are great examples of this being done well. Nakatomi Plaza is a relatively challenging game with spikes of ridiculous difficulty. And you know what? I don't mind difficult games, but the way in which Nakatomi Plaza does it is objectively cheap. Take a look at me rounding this corner. I have not edited these clips in any way. These two enemies basically have 100% headshot accuracy and 100% reaction speed, and I might even give this a pass if they were some type of boss, but they're not. They're just patrolling a corridor. Now, I eventually did pass them, but these types of random spikes in difficulty without explanation caused both frustration and fatigue. Despite being based on the Lithtech engine, which was certainly showing its age in 2002, Nakatomi Plaza is a fairly good-looking game for the time. Each of the levels have quite a different feeling, as you would expect from a large office tower, and despite my complaints about it being linear, the levels themselves are quite large, which helps to convey the scale of Nakatomi Plaza. There's a lot of attention to detail in how areas shown in the film are depicted within the game, and everything from the construction areas to the rooftops are remarkably well recreated. Performance and stability, at least in modern times, was also very good, with the game running at a locked 30 FPS with no crashes, which, coming straight from my Star Trek Dominion Wars retrospective, was certainly a nice change. There are some good quality of life presentation items also in play, like the ability to skip dialogue and so on, as well as a fairly forgiving auto and quick save system. Sound design is very good, with a particular highlight being the voice acting. Honestly, this is great stuff. Take a listen.
Listen up. The police have arrived. Stay off your radios until I say otherwise. Our communications could be monitored.
Hello there.
I told all of you I want radio silence until further notice.
Since I waxed Tony and Marco and his friend here, I figured you and Carl and Franco might be a little lonely, so I wanted to give you a call.
Who are you then?
There's the fly in the ointment, Hans, a monkey in the wrench, a pain in the ass. I could have used his shoes. 9 million terrorists in the world, and I gotta kill one with feet smaller than my sister. Alice, what have you told them?
I told them we were old friends and that you were my guest at the party.
Alice, you shouldn't be doing this.
Tell me about it. They want you to tell them where the detonators are. They know people are listening. They want the detonators or they're gonna kill me.
Honestly, for me, the voice acting is hands down the best part of the game, and was in part what helped to keep me engaged throughout the journey. Music and sound effects are also good, certainly not in the same league as the voice acting, but solid performances. Nakatomi Plaza is a frustrating game to critique, because for all its challenges, deep down, I do honestly think there is an entertaining game. The problem is, this entertaining game is sitting under a pile of mechanics and systems which don't just not work together, but actively conspire against one another to create even more frustration. The overall playtime of the game is about 8 to 10 hours, but in my opinion, this is dramatically padded out due to the way in which the mechanics are implemented, especially with things like gunplay and AI pathing. I'd say the game would be about 5 to 6 hours if these things were tidied up, and yeah, while it would be a much shorter game, I'd argue that it would be a much more enjoyable game. But that's enough from me. Do you agree or disagree with my opinions? Let me know down in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.